internal.
There's definitely some external factors, but the biggest one which hit at that point was self-destruction.
The test at the CrossFit Games is everything. If you're going to make a claim of the fittest on earth, which is a massive claim.
Literally, it had become really big, but like a lot of sports that are growing, it's not very profitable as it grows. They were spending more money on the sport than the sport was making for them, whereas somebody else might have took on funding and exploded this thing, right?
Yeah.
They did the opposite. They cut all the funding for it, cut as much as it could, and especially cut the legs out of the sport, no matter which way you look at it. Got rid of all the regionals. Then it was like, oh, what's the point of competing in the first place? Stopped doing the Netflix documentaries, and then everything started to unravel from there.
Oh, right. Oh, look at that timing. That was ridiculous. Sorry, bro.
Welcome back.
All right, why has the CrossFit Games died? And before we get into it, you're probably wondering, shit, who are you guys to be talking about CrossFit Games and dying? What do you know about it? Well, actually, shit, we competed in CrossFit many years ago at a pretty high level. Raf, you qualified individually at regionals. We participated in the team at the regionals level, Asia Pacific 3 times. So lots of competing experience. And then we also owned 3 CrossFit gyms for 7 years as well. So I reckon we've pretty much seen every side of it. Not alone, right? CrossFit competitor, CrossFit gym owner. We've seen the sport basically rise and fall. And this video is about what caused the fall, and there's lots of factors involved. I think we have a pretty interesting perspective, seeing so many different sides of it, and that's what we want to get into today. Definitely at the end of this episode is going to be the most important reason, the factor that trumps all of them. But so stick around to the end. That's what we're going to go through with it. So getting into the first one, let's start with some facts, right? Let's start with the Open. So for those of you who don't know, the CrossFit Open is basically what was and probably still is the most participated online fitness competition in the world. And that was really how they gathered, the CrossFit Games gathered momentum and participation. And I think it was a really good single indicator of like, how is the general public's interest and the general public participation in the sport of CrossFit, in the CrossFit Games. Not like who's going to CrossFit gyms, but like how interested are people in the CrossFit Games. And really what I've learned is like how well the CrossFit Games is doing is like really how well CrossFit is doing, because that's what it became.
Yeah, and I mean the Open it's the first stage of the CrossFit Games. So it's like part of the CrossFit Games.
Yes.
It's like level 1. But anyone can do it. You don't need to really qualify. So it is the best gauge of the popularity of the sport, because to be honest, the people doing the Open, they are the diehard fans, and they are really the people that follow the rest of the games, because it hasn't got a huge following outside of people that do CrossFit. You know, It's not like, I don't know, basketball. Heaps of non-basketball players follow it. This is more like it's the people doing CrossFit, that follow it. So 2011 first Open, 26,000. By the time it hit 2015, 4 years later, it had over 10x, 273,000.
Nuts.
Insane. 324, 380,000, 416,000. So it was growing, but at a smaller and smaller rate until 2018.
It peaked in 2018.
Yep. So nearly 500,000 people doing it, which is pretty unbelievable. Right,
Did we compete that year, 2018?
2017, we went as a team.
We definitely
we went as a team.
I think
2018,
we competed 2018,
yeah. No, that was my last Open, 2017. So I think I did part of it. So then that was the end of it. And then just decline. 2019, 2020 down to 239,000. The excuse was obviously COVID as part of this.
Yeah.
But COVID is over now, and they still have gone up a little bit. It's up to 293,000. Which still, for comparison, is basically where they were 7 years ago in 2015.
Yeah, which you would think if any sport in 7 years was still where it was at or went up and then went down, you would say it's a failing sport.
Yeah, and I mean, like when we were in 2015, it had just gone up 30% and 50% on the year before. If you ask me where it is in 2022, most people would have said, oh, probably like 2 million.
Yeah. Yeah, look at this growth.
Yeah, look at the
compounding growth.
If you had said to someone the same 7 years later then, they would think you were insane.
Well, even if you're compounding by like 6% in 10 years, you're almost double.
You double.
So
you double.
Yeah. So like,
and they've gone nowhere.
Yeah. So it's going down. These are facts. And like, I think just with any sport, think about it, right? If basketball, the sport, if the NBA wants to get better and better, how does it get better? More kids are doing it. You're getting more talent. You're getting more competition. You're getting more money into the sport at a lower level, getting better academies. You're getting better coaching. You're getting better facilities. You're getting better youth programs. And that's going to make the talent that's rising up to the top of the sport even better. And what's happened is because the base of participation has dropped, obviously it's had a trickle up, down effect, so that the top of the sport is just really not as good to watch because, of course, they're getting better and they're getting stronger, but just not at the same rate. And this is part of what's getting into. So another thing that's happened, more facts, is they've lost some TV rights as well. So they started online. I remember we were watching the first CrossFit Games, I think just on their website.
Yeah,
I think
which was an awful
terrible experience.
One of the worst viewing experiences. I don't blame them. It's probably very expensive.
Yeah. They did
but
their
it is
best.
truly that was one of the worst watching experiences of all time. We were such diehards. We got through it.
Yeah.
But then pretty soon they were on ESPN.
Yep.
And that, as a gym owner, and even
That's huge.
when I first joined the gym, I remember a few people that joined CrossFit with me saw it on ESPN. A number of people. I saw it on ESPN. I walked down and joined. Right.
Yeah.
It was huge. I would probably go in with ESPN also being on Netflix. I know that's not
I was going
TV
to say
rights,
that, yeah.
but they're on fucking Netflix.
Yeah.
And they were on fucking Netflix at a time when Netflix was like in its heyday, I feel,
Peaking.
of being a streaming service because there wasn't as much like competition.
There was like, it was just Netflix.
It was every day was like Netflix and chill. It was like, what do you do at night? You watch Netflix. Whereas now it's like, oh, I don't even have Netflix anymore.
When can you maybe look that up? When was the CrossFit Games on Netflix? When was their first documentary? Because 2016 is Finding the Fittest or whatever.
Yeah, I think they had been on Netflix before. Man, they even had the original CrossFit documentary was on Netflix.
Right.
They had the 2009 documentary, like Finding the Fittest or whatever. That was on Netflix. They probably had like 5 big documentaries on Netflix, which is unbelievable for a fitness routine.
Yeah.
How many P90X documentaries do you see yearly on
Yeah.
Netflix? And to be honest, I actually think they were pretty good. Like, yeah, I'm a fan or whatever of CrossFit, but they were pretty enjoyable. I know a lot of people that were not into CrossFit that watched these as well. So alongside losing the rights to of the actual CrossFit Games to ESPN, I'm not sure where it is now. I think it's just on YouTube and the website. They also lost the Netflix, which was probably even bigger.
And the whole thing started to unravel because, I mean, like I'm thinking about the trajectory. It was going really well. Things were good. They're on Netflix. They're growing. They're on ESPN. And, 2018, they hit their peak. It's not even, you can't even blame the pandemic. Things started to unravel. From your perspective, like what did you see as like the main reasons that they started to unravel in
It
terms
was
of
self-destruction.
internal
There's definitely some
self-destruction?
external factors, but the biggest one, which hit at that point, was self-destruction. So literally it had become really big, but like a lot of sports that are growing, it's not very profitable as it grows, right?
Yeah.
They were spending more money on the sport than the sport was making for them. So the heads of the company decided to, like, whereas somebody else might have took on funding and exploded this thing, right?
Yep.
To keep it going, they did the opposite. They cut all the funding for it, cut as much as it could, and especially cut the legs out of the sport, no matter which way you look at it. Got rid of all the regionals. Then it was like, oh, what's the point of competing in the first place? Stopped doing the Netflix documentaries, and then everything started to unravel from there.
Yeah, they fired their media team. There's a few other things that we get into as well. They changed the location of the games. But yeah, I think they just really took the wind out of the sails. And another thing that happened on like a grassroots level is there was just like so much other competition to CrossFit gyms. That's what we
Yeah,
noticed, right?
that's a good point.
So like as a group fitness offering, CrossFit was like the thing to do, no matter who you were. If you were like, I want to do group fitness, CrossFit was like one of your only options. And then what started happening is the Barry's Boot Camps, the Orange Series, the F45s, they started to really take off as CrossFit took off. And eventually people were like, injuries was a massive thing as well. And there wasn't like an alternative to CrossFit. Your alternative was, I'm getting strong, I'm doing well, I'm having fun, I'm losing weight, I'm injured. Okay, but this is my only option. I really enjoy it, so I'm going to do this. But then eventually it was like, oh, well, come try F45. You won't get injured over here. And so people are like, oh, let me try that. Oh, I'm not getting injured. Oh, okay, I'm doing that. I'm still enjoying it. They tell their friend, etc. And then all of a sudden, the leads that started to generate on the business side of CrossFit Gym started to slow down and dry up. And that eventually had a compounding effect of just like less people interested in participating in the sport. And there's always going to be an effect of like, yeah, I've done this 2 or 3 times. Now I'm over it.
Yeah.
And it kind of ran its course. Most people had done 2 or 3 opens, realized they were pretty shit. They were just an average person. And then eventually they just decided it's not for them anymore.
And I think that goes well into just the repetition of the whole thing. It was so exciting at the beginning, but at a certain point, I think the reality of just how repetitive the sport was did start to come to fruition.
Yeah.
I know people could point to other sports and be like, well, it's way less repetitive than Olympic weightlifting, but it's different because you're just like not going for like mastery in these single movements. It was more about, it was meant to be a like random, always changing type of event. And then people started to realize after several years, it actually had become very repetitive.
Yeah.
And even if you remember that main I know everyone in CrossFit made fun of her, but like the main thing, I think, what's the name of the Biggest Loser girl? Who's super famous?
Julia. Yeah.
Yeah,
I know who you're talking about.
Huge
She's like
name.
the main face
like
of American
Bob,
Biggest
yeah,
Loser.
Exactly, huge name,
Yeah.
right? She came out and she's like, CrossFit's really repetitive. So that's what the public thinks at that point, right? It's like, it actually is really repetitive. It's like the same.
And she said it was dangerous, I think, as well.
Probably.
Yeah.
Well, she's not too far off, but
Yeah.
I mean, she's not that educated about it, but some of the points was like that. That's
Jillian Michaels.
Yeah, that's what people are thinking. They're like, this actually is starting to get repetitive. The whole CrossFit Games was starting to get reasonably repetitive as well. And it just didn't have what other sports have that allow them to be repetitive.
Well, part of what was making the CrossFit Games exciting was the shock factor. It was like, we're going to row a marathon. They're like, oh my God. They're like, we're going to do a deadlift ladder up to 600 pounds. Oh my God. We're going to do a snatch ladder to 140. Oh, there's only so many cards you can pull when you butt up against the ceiling of like human capacity, right?
Yeah, it's like, we're going to do
physical
Grace
limitations
twice. It's like, can you just do it 5 times? Like,
yeah.
When does this end?
And so eventually they pushed up against that ceiling. And the one thing they always used to talk about when the games coming up is like, man, 2 years ago, now they're snatching their deadlift. Or like, man, we used to do this workout at 60 kilos. Now we're doing it double 120. Eventually that slows down. You can't go from like 120 to 240.
No, it's completely stopped.
Yeah.
Like the weights are the same as they were 5, 6 years ago.
Athletes are probably going backwards as they work on different skills.
Yeah, which is like how it is in all sports, right?
Yeah.
But the problem what shot them in the foot was like, what was exciting about it was insane jumps in performance.
Yeah.
Which were like, we were like trained to expect that.
Yeah.
You know, we're like, dude, if they're snatching this much, dude, what are they going to be smashing in 5 years? And then you realize like, oh, actually, yeah, the same.
Yeah, and one of the things that happened, and you really didn't understand this unless you were participating in the sport, in trying to qualify for the CrossFit Games, like we were so many times, is that it was so enjoyable. Like, we're basically the second generation of CrossFitters, right? So like first generation was like all the guys that started in like their mid-20s, late 20s, early 30s. And there was just the open open wasn't even around then, right? Yep. So a lot of those guys came through. And you didn't really have to have much of a sporting background. You had to just be pretty fit. That was like deadlifts and burpees and kettlebell swings. That was like the only movements. And it was just like who was tough, who was mentally tough. And then the next generation came along and it was us. And we were starting in our sort of late teens, right? We were starting like 18, 19, 20. And we had the advantage, bit more youth, could start a little bit earlier, probably better mobility. There was better programming, better coaches coming around. And so we had a sort of an advantage on that first generation. And we would overtake them, but it wasn't a huge advantage, right? Now, the next generation, the third generation, now, if you understand anything about developing skills and developing athletes, the sooner you start, the more exponential the growth is as you become older and older. So, for example, if you start playing tennis when you're 10 versus when you're 5, it has a dramatic effect on how successful you can be as a tennis player, and versus when you're 15. So, like, the difference between, 15 and 5 in terms of development is not 10 years, it's like 30 years of development, right? So that's basically what happened. Then the next generation washed through, and then they were so far ahead of where we were, and because they were starting so much younger. They were starting when they were 10, 11, 12. These are the kids of the first generation, that they were so much better than us by such, and some people probably listening to this going, these guys just suck and they're bitter and they never made it. I'm like, this is just the fact, right? This just happened to everyone. A lot of these young guys that came through, besides obviously being the elite in the sport, and there's always going to be outliers, but just as a general participation, 16, 17, 18-year-olds were coming through, and they would absolutely slaughter the workout times of the second generation, people like us, and so many people that we competed with that were so good at the time. And these, this used to be, we had one person we knew that was like the top in Australia at like very specific movements. Like if it was these movements involved, and then a few years went by, and then got back into some competing, and then the sort of the new generation was in, and it was like, oh, like we're looking at the lineup here, like he'll win this workout hands down for sure. He's like best in Australia. This, and like comes like middle of the pack, getting close to last. It's like this was a person that for a few years no one could even touch, and now there's all these kids that no one's heard of that have just come through and absolutely destroyed him, because they've put 6-7 years. They've trained from 12 to 17 to 18. Starting snatching when you're 12, starting skill development, pull-ups, all these movements, getting that many years when you're so young. Like you just can't really compete against it. So I think that sort of happened as well, the advancement of the sport. And now that third generation to the fourth to the fifth generation, because they've all kind of starting at the same point now, they're all kind of starting, say, like probably 10 to 12, like if they're getting into CrossFit, maybe younger, but because they're all kind of starting at the same point now, they're not getting heaps better than the generation before. So it's just kind of like where a normal sport is at. A normal sport is like, okay, well, we all kind of start at, 8 years old, 9, 10 years old, and we all kind of just see who's the best. And that just doesn't really make it exciting anymore it was so exciting for us to come through and like wash out the previous generation and like smash them. And then it was probably exciting for the next generation to smash our generation. But now it's just so even. It's just like, it's just not that exciting anymore. We're just like getting normal talent like any other sport.
It's just settled, and even that is it's the personality. So in the early generation of CrossFit, you had personalities that you really look forward to, right? Because you think about people, it was like, dude, this guy was like a fireman, and now he's jumping into CrossFit. He's like the toughest fireman of all time, right? It was like, oh, this guy was like, he was a washed up baseball player, but he was always the hero of the gym, and like he's such an animal, right?
Yeah.
So you had all these like just crazy personalities. Dude, like the gym owner that lives in the gym, he's going to compete. So you had all these crazy personalities, people with lives, people like, some of them were like,
relatable.
Man, people were like, dude, I've lost like 40 kilos of fat, and now I'm going to be a CrossFit competitor. And you were like, dude, this is nuts. Like, look at this guy.
Yeah.
So you had these like, really cool personalities people could relate to. They were just like regular people. Yeah. Regular people that were
took up the sport.
And took up the sport and got really good at it, right? And you'd watch them, be like, now they're like competing in front of like a stadium. This is epic.
Yeah.
And you'd get around it. And the problem is, those dudes are like 40 now, and they're still everyone's favorite CrossFitter. Because the new CrossFitters, they're just like, oh yeah, I started when I was 14, and now I'm really good at it.
Yeah, and I've been full time.
Yeah.
My parents.
Oh, so like, did it help you get in shape? Oh no, I started when I was 14. I can't remember when I was.
Yeah.
How did you first learn like pull-ups? I can't remember when I didn't know how to do these.
Yeah.
I've done them perfectly since I was 12.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, this story sucks now.
Well, I think what it did is it just took the excitement out of the participation for the everyday person, and that's
you lost all the relatability.
That's what when we started, there were so many people that would come to the gym and be like, one day I could make regionals, and like that wasn't that far off realistic. Nowadays,
some would. Eventually, some would. Yeah. Every bunch of 100, someone would.
And that's what made so many people participate, because of the hope that they could eventually get there, and that their numbers weren't that far off what they needed to do. Nowadays, you walk in, you see the open, and you do one workout, and you're like, there's just like no planet where it's fathomable, like what they did and what I did. Like, and I'm sure there were people that felt that way when we were doing it, but the percentage was smaller. And now it's just like, it's just so far off. It's just absurd. So that was obviously a huge part of it. Now, one of the big differences that I think it made, we actually never went there, but we spoke to a lot of people that did go there and have been to both. But the CrossFit Games moved from LA to Madison. I think Madison is northeast. I think it's up near.
It's just somewhere no one ever goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They basically made it really cheap.
Yeah.
Right.
And they took it out of the home.
And I think that by making it, cheap, and obviously LA has amazing weather as well. So the CrossFit Games, the imagery, the visualization, the feel was like, it's hot, it's warm. They got the sunglasses on, they got the belt out. Madison's wet and cold, and it's like they're standing out in the rain, it's overcast, no one's wearing sunglasses, maybe a couple of events it's indoors. It's like it just lost a little bit of the magic that was like
a huge amount of that
CrossFit out in the sun, because CrossFit was started in LA, right? It started in California.
Thing. It was part of like, it was going back to the Mecca. It was like, it was started in LA. LA is also the home of fitness in general.
Yeah.
Home of bodybuilding. So like you were like heading back to the home of fitness where this new fitness thing had started. Yeah, you're like literally down the road from like Gold's Gym. So it was just part of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Weather was amazing. The original CrossFit Games was done around the corner. Like, this is where it's at. This is where the owner lives. Like, this was it. And now you're just at some random stadium in the middle of the country.
It looks like they're in England.
Which has,
it's always overcast.
Which has no relation to the sport.
And every time they go, people say, like, it's just not the same. Like, LA is LA, right? You go there, you can go watch an NBA game. You can go do this. You can go shopping and celebrities and Hollywood. You do all this stuff. You go to Madison, you're only there for one reason, and then you're in and out, right? So it loses a bit of that, well, I'm going to like tie it into my holiday, and then we're going to go to Vegas. And there were just so many trips that we heard about, that we went on as well, that other people went on, that they just made like a sick holiday out of it, right? The whole experience collectively was awesome. But when they took it to Madison, it just really lost the shine. And especially because different if you went to like, because it's not just weather-based, right? Because if you took it to New York, it's like, dude, that is sick, right? Okay, yes, it might be cold and wet and overcast and it storms or it snows, whatever, right? Maybe it's not the same weather. It's not the dry desert of LA, but it just lost a little bit of that, because it said we are saving money. It just made everyone feel like, fuck, like the sport is going cheap. You know what I mean? It's like if the UFC just all of a sudden decided we're just going to go find pubs now.
Yeah.
People
It's
be
just
like, what happened to the stadium?
You can only go in one direction with these types of things.
Exactly.
And because part of the enjoyment was the fact that it was getting bigger and better.
And people wanted to compete in the what was it? It wasn't Staples Center. What did they call it?
So the Coliseum. Yeah, it was at the Staples Center. No, it wasn't.
No, it
Staples
wasn't
Center.
Staples Center.
Yeah.
No, they had it at
Yeah.
it was at the Tennis Center or something. I don't know, one of the events at the tennis. But anyway, wherever they had it in LA, like people wanted to go there.
Yes.
People wanted to
famous.
compete. Like people's dream was like, I want to compete in LA one day, not I want to compete in Madison.
No.
You know, and so that just killed it a little bit. Like imagine people want to fight in the UFC and they want to fight in Madison Square Garden. They want to make it to MSG, the fighting capital. They want to make it to Vegas. No one wants to go fight in a pub in Madison. You know what I mean? Like there's just an element that you just killed the dream of so many people by like taking it to Madison.
Yeah.
So that was like a really, I think, a bit of a dagger in the kind of side of CrossFit. And then they made heaps of other cost saving things around regionals events, and like the regionals weren't as good and they were taking them to worse stadiums, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, overall, I think that move hurt them more than they expected. Now, one thing that this is definitely out of their control. So I definitely don't blame them for this. And it is a little bit unfortunate on their behalf, but they went from Matt Fraser to Rich Froning.
No, it went from Rich Froning to Matt Fraser.
Rich Froning to Matt Fraser. My bad. You just got really lucky with a Rich Froning, right? He's just a poster boy. I mean, he's got the look, and I think that there's so much. And it's not like Matt Fraser doesn't look fit. Of course, he looks fit, but
He looks fit.
the dude does not look like Rich Froning.
Yeah.
I know he's a little bit shorter. He's hairier. It's not quite the ideal for every guy. Like if you gathered up 100,000 people across the world and you chopped off the head of Matt Fraser and Rich Froning, you put the two body types next to each other and go, pick one. What do you prefer? Guys and girls, Rich's going to win every single time, right? The dude was just cut from stone. He was just an Adonis.
You know, I think it wasn't just Rich Froning. Kind of bring up the photo of, look up Rich Froning, Jason Khalipa pool, right? You've probably seen this photo. It's like the most famous, like him and Matt Chan, right?
Chan,
They're standing. I also think just the physiques are not as big and muscular as they were in the early days. And I likely think it's just when they started, it's that one there in the grey. No. That he is beast.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that one there in the grey.
Yeah.
I also think that when they started drug testing the sport, the physiques got worse.
Look at him.
And when they weren't drug testing, the physiques, particularly the guys, were way more off the chain than they are now. I don't think they look like that these days.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I haven't been following it too closely. There's still athletes that look like that, but I do think
Dude, they look insane. Look at the size of them.
Yeah, but I mean, Rich was just the perfect guy to be the face of the sport as it was going. Right? He could talk well. He was just that typical, you know, just like he was just a perfect.
Yeah, he's a perfect boy.
Like American, what do they call him? Not the alpha Chad. Anyway, he was just like everything that then you know, obviously CrossFit had the highest participation in America, but he just represented all the American values so well. Like he loved guns, he loved, you know, out on the ranch. He's like a family man. He's a man of God. Like he was just perfect from that perspective, and I think it really helped them grow the sport. They also had like. In the women, it was a bit of a mixed bag, kind of who was winning, who was not winning. But they had Camille LeBlanc. She was like obviously very beautiful. She had Annie Sora's daughter also. And I'm not saying Tia's obviously that beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but Tia isn't a much more aggressive physique. You know what I mean? That's not going to appeal to as many girls. And so these are just the cycles of what becomes the face of the sport, and they dramatically affect the participation and, you know, the I want to look like that guy. Because CrossFit, at the end of the day, it's people are using it as an exercise program to look a certain way, no matter what they say. No one wants to be fat and be the CrossFit Games champion. It's like, oh, if the CrossFit Games champion looks like that, I want to look like that. It's the same way, same reason some people take up swimming. I want to look like a swimmer, so I'm going to start swimming. Now, that's not how it happens. But Rich was everything that they needed to help grow the sport. And I think they knew that. They leaned into it and they really promoted him and they pushed him and they got as much content out of him as possible. And he's still in the sport and he's still doing well. But I think when he was no longer the face of the sport, a little bit of the interest died in some ways. That's just how it is.
Yeah. And what they have struggled to create as well is just like actual rivalries in the sport.
Yeah.
Like, there's never any shit talking that I don't know that I've ever seen of, and there's never like, dude, the matchup between these two guys. They just like struggled to create like genuine rivalries and personalities. Like that's what creates interest in sport.
Yeah.
Yeah, when
It's
these guys face off, it's gonna be epic.
It's because it was always the sport that, well, you're not really competing against each other, so you're kind of in your own lane, so you can't really affect anyone. But also, it was always a sport that was like, we cheer for the last person.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that at some point, if you're a true competitor, it gets fucking old. You know what I mean? You want to see, like, I don't know, you want to see like Matt Fraser step over a dead body and just be like, I fucking
You want good sportsmanship, but you want rivalries.
Yeah.
Of course you want rivalries.
Yeah. Like you want, when was it? I think it was the year when, it was the last year that Froning won. He like stole Matt Fraser's chalk.
Yeah, and it's like the most popular thing in the
That
whole
was
CrossFit
like the
Games,
best.
right?
That was like the best it got.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You want to see like, and that's like literally, everyone was like, that's what they talked about.
Yeah.
Not the 13th time everyone clapped last place. It's good to have that in a gym, obviously. But yeah, just not what creates interest in the sport.
Yeah. Yeah, they did need a sick rivalry where they were just talking shit the whole time. And then I guess the last thing, or one of the last things here is they had, obviously they lost the Reebok sponsorship. And there was something about when Reebok signed on. Okay, it's not Nike, it's not Adidas. I mean, it's part of the Adidas group. It's not Under Armour. But it's like Nike could be next.
Yeah.
You know, I think it could be next. And that was like what everyone was getting excited for. What huge brand is going to take over the sport of CrossFit next once the Reebok contract expires? And no knock on Red Bull, but Red Bull is not Reebok.
Noble. I think do you call it Red Bull?
Noble.
Oh, Noble. I thought you said
Noble.
Red Bull. I was like, that would be sick.
Red Bull would be sick.
Yeah, Noble. Yeah, it's not the same.
Again, it was a step
Yeah.
down.
Incredible brand for what they've achieved, but
course.
not like
Yeah, of course.
not a world recognized
It's not Nike.
sports name.
No, it's not Nike. It's not Adidas. And if it wasn't Nike, Adidas, and Under Armour, a Red Bull, a fucking Mercedes, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, it needs to be a name that everybody knows. Everybody in the Western world is like, oh wow, cool.
Yeah. Unless the brand itself did a bit of a UFC and became bigger than any brand that it had under its wings, which is kind of what UFC did. It went from Reebok to Venom. Didn't really affect it because it was growing in every other area. But for CrossFit, they really needed a huge brand to kind of come in and be like, no, we're going to because you think about the marketing engine that's behind a Nike, they could have totally rebuilt the sport. They could have scripted up athletes and gave them personalities, and they could have just brought years and years of like sports marketing into Noble has no sports marketing. Unfortunately, they're not really going to be able to help you here.
Yeah, it's the budget.
So I think the whole thing just kind of shrunk. Will it grow again? I think that's really the question. Look, you never say never, right? For the sake of people that are still interested in CrossFit and still doing CrossFit, I hope it does. It's not that I don't want it to succeed again. I'd be more than happy for it to take off. But the question is, do we think it's actually going to explode and succeed again? I'm betting on no. The reason I'm betting on no is because I thought with the takeover of the new owner that, what was his name? The new CEO?
Yeah, I can't remember.
Anyway, he's owned a tech company. I thought they're going to bring some really innovative ideas yet. He's had it for about 3 or 4 years now. Nothing's really come out of it. Eric Rosa? Is that his name?
Eric Rosa, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. Maybe he's got a much longer term plan, but I think you needed to give us something. Give us something that is going to make people want to be engaged in it again. Bring old fans back into the sport. But yeah, there was just nothing. He needed to flip it on its head and be small tweaks to the programming or, the structure of the regionals, the open. It's not it. It's like, okay, the CrossFit Games is done. We're now doing the CrossFit Games once every 4 years, and now there's a CrossFit League or whatever. And this is how the league works. And here are the teams. And we've got Team Nike and Team Adidas and Team Under Armour and Team this. And you're like, fuck, you know what? This really, I might just have a look and see how this is going and just see what's different here. But that something like that hasn't happened. So there are realms in which this exists to be possible. I just thought it would have happened by now. I'm yet to see them happen, but they totally could.
Yeah,
they definitely could.
I think much more likely is it just stays pretty similar to how it is for a long period of time. Unless something dramatically changes, it just seems like that's how much funding they've got. That's the interest in the sport. It's hard to see something literally turning this thing on fire.
Yeah.
It takes a lot to build an insane momentum like they had.
Yeah.
And they had something pretty unbelievable. And it's just so difficult to see that happening again.
Yeah. There you go. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this, a bit of an opinion piece. Let us know your feelings down in the comments below. If you're listening on the podcast as well, you can always message the Instagram. As always, If you haven't yet, please hit the little button that says subscribe. That is super helpful for us. And then make sure you tell a friend, hit the like button, drop us a comment. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. See you all in the next video.